Welcome to another episode of the OHL podcast from snowbound Southern Ontario. My name is Mike Farwell. My partner on this pod is Dan Mahar. I don't know about you, Dansky, but I have had enough already of the snow, and it's only the beginning of December.
Oh, yeah. Well, I heard they said it could be as much as 70 centimeters. So I'm happy it wasn't that, but it's way too much. I mean, it's still November, right? Let's go.
Exactly. 70 centimeters. For those of you who are not on metric like us weird Canadians, that's a little more than 2 feet of snow.
Yes.
Some areas around us might have gotten that much. We probably got away with about a foot to a foot and a half overall. So I guess, relatively speaking, not too bad, but still way too much for this time of year. It all came within about a 48 to 60 hour period, and Dan and I are completely done. Something you need to get done is a subscription to this podcast. Click that little button, subscribe, so that means every time a new episode comes out, you will have it delivered directly to you, getting the notification that a new episode is here. We come out every Tuesday morning on YouTube and on your favorite podcast channel. You can find Dan Mahar on X at his name, Dan Mahar. I'm on X at Farwell_OHL, and keep in touch with us by leaving comments on the pod, whether you listen or watch. Drop us an email anytime as well. OHLpodcast at Rogers.com. We might have received, like Eric, I'm going to shout you out right now, might be the best email, Dan, that we've gotten the entire, 3 years we've been doing this podcast together? Pretty clever stuff from Eric.
It was an awesome email, and I don't want, so we've had some great ones. We've had some really good emails from followers, so I'm not sure I want to rank them, but this one was right up there.
Oh, come on. Encourage those others to step up their game. Let's go. I'm talking to you, Johnny807. No, we have had some great feedback. Eric's is terrific, and we'll get to that later in this episode. But a couple of quick hits as we get underway now that you have quickly subscribed to this podcast. One of those quick hits, I think the announcement was being made as we were recording last week, Dan, but just a quick shout out to Matthew Turcotte, who is the new head coach of the Sarnia Sting. It makes a lot of sense because Turcotte had Alessandro Diorio, Beckham Edwards. The Sting just traded for Ty Challenger, another player that Turcotte had when he was coaching with Hockey Canada at the U17s and U18s last summer. This one seems to make sense for Sarnia since Turcotte was currently a free agent after coaching for about a decade in the Q. And he was also, coincidentally, a guest recently on this very podcast. So Turcotte, we're giving you the OHL podcast bump for that new gig in Sarnia.
I was just going to say, obviously Dylan Sika was watching the OHL podcast and said, hey, that guy looks like my new guy. And I think it's a great hire. You just referenced some of the background, the resume he brings to it. Knowing a couple of those kids certainly is going to help get off the ground running. But yeah, I think it's a solid hire. He's a guy that was ripe for a gig, and Sarnia needs a fresh face, so we'll see how it goes.
I really enjoyed the conversation we got to have with him on this podcast. If you missed it, I'll drop the link in the notes for this podcast. You can go back and watch. The guy certainly has an understanding of the modern athlete, how to communicate with them, and we'll see how it works out for Matthew Turcotte in Sarnia. But congratulations to him again, and check the link to the feature interview. Runs about 30 minutes in the notes of this episode of the OHL podcast. Something else, Dan, and we were kind of having fun with this last week. In fact, I think we ended off saying something along the lines of you were going to call Greyhounds GM Kyle Raftis and say, listen, I've got some ideas for you, Kyle, because I don't know if you intended it, but a couple of times it became a little subplot to our episode last week. You were saying, hey, Sue, I think you might have a chance here in the Western Conference, time to make a move. So I don't know if you made that call or if, Dan, you had Colin Fitzgerald from the Petes in mind for the Greyhounds, but that's what happens. Fitzgerald goes from Peterborough to Sault Ste. Marie for 2 seconds, 2/3, a fourth, and a sixth. Again, is this what you had in mind, Dan Mahar?
Not specifically. I won't take credit for that. I mean, the Colin Fitzgerald name came out of the blue to me as being tied to the Sioux. I was more thinking, just looking at the Sioux status, that they've got some really good pieces, specifically in that 2007-2008 group. And, Brady Martin's back this year. Is he back next year? I mean, people are just assuming he's not. So I'm not 100% convinced, but it's unlikely he's back. We'll say that. So Sioux looked to me with a wide open West and no one looking like a powerhouse with lots of draft picks positioned to make a move. The Colin Fitzgerald one is interesting to me because there you go with the 2008, right? There's a kid whose draft pedigree was slipping maybe a little. Things weren't going as well in Peterborough as he wanted, and he wanted to get back on the horse. Tons of talent, but being a 2008, that suggests that Sioux is maybe looking at that horizon of next year as well. That's as a player who's going to be coming into his own next year. So, interesting tip of the hand by Kyle Raftis, but yeah, I figured he was going to be buying one way or the other, and just wasn't sure who. So this one kind of came out of the blue.
Interesting to me because, of course, this was a first round pick, third overall last year to Peterborough, and a Peterborough native, Colin Fitzgerald. So suggests to me that it just, for whatever reason, wasn't working out for him in his hometown. And the change of scenery idea, which will come up in the wraparound this week on the OHL podcast, but maybe the change of scenery is what Colin Fitzgerald wanted for himself, and Kyle Raftis is hoping helps bring him back to that status of a third overall pick into this league.
Yeah, and I think Colin Fitzgerald's a kid who there was a little bit of turbulence behind the scenes with his draft year into the OHL. Being a Peterborough kid, knowing how high Peterborough was selecting, there was some questions about whether he wanted to go there, and there was some question about whether he'd report. And there's just been a little bit of turmoil behind the scenes with that relationship all along. And he ultimately signed and put on a brave face and gave it a go. And I'm not sure all the ins and outs of those conversations, but I do know that Rob Wilson's style, the style he demands of his team, doesn't 100% align with what Colin Fitzgerald brings. And he's a guy that wants to run and gun and bring some offense. So maybe he's a guy that just said, I gave it the college try, but I was never all in with this idea. And, now that it's my draft year, it's November, it's starting to slip on the rankings, it's time to ask for a move. And I think, we see this time and again, not often with third overall kids playing in their hometown, but makes it a bit noteworthy. But I think that's what happened in this case.
It's been interesting on the trade market already this season, and we're still a little over a month away from that January 10th trade deadline. So it's going to get interesting-er, the word I just made up, as we look ahead to that horizon. The biggest deal of them all so far, Dan, is the Jet Luchanko from Guelph to Brantford deal. And there have been a few people raising eyebrows thinking that, gosh, did Guelph get back what one would have expected them to get back for Jet Luchanko? So I've been working on a little conspiracy theory here. I didn't bring my tinfoil hat specifically to this episode of the OHL podcast, but I'd love to run this theory by you, Dan, and get your thoughts on it.
Oh, absolutely. I'm all in for tinfoil hat.
I love it. That's why this podcast and this relationship works so well. Okay, a quick shameless plug as I get into this conspiracy theory. I know some of you listen to this podcast on your favorite audio podcast platform. Awesome. Make sure you're subscribing there so you don't miss an episode. And some of you watch it on YouTube. Again, awesome. Make sure you subscribe there. You'll never miss an episode. And on our YouTube channel, the OHL podcast, you will get other content as well. Sometimes when I'm around a rink, I'll share something from that rink. I had an interesting video from the walk to the press box in Oshawa the other week that people really seemed to like. So try to bring you some of that content. And something else is a little something I call Fridays with Farwell. Every Friday morning, you'll get a little riff from me on something that's happening around the league. So if you are a subscriber, then it will automatically give you a notification that, hey, a new video has been posted to the OHL podcast channel and you can check it out. So this past Friday, I floated the following conspiracy theory. And I want to be really clear up front about this, that this is not meant in any way to be a dig at or throwing shade at Lane Gallagher, who by all accounts is beyond fine as a hockey player, a real strong prospect that the Guelph Storm are getting in return for Jet Luchanko. I don't want the young man to feel bad. I understand that he is a high-end prospect and will absolutely make an impact for the Guelph Storm. That's not about this. It's just about, I guess, recently what the trade market has looked like. So I'll give you a couple of examples. Pavel Minchikov goes from Saginaw to Ottawa back in 2023. Minchikov, an NHL first-rounder. In exchange for Minchikov, the Saginaw Spirit got 9 draft picks. Last year, 2024, the Kitchener Rangers moved Carson Rakoff to the Brampton Steelheads for 10 draft picks. And Rakoff was an NHL second rounder. So Luchanko, NHL first rounder, has actually played NHL games already. High-end talent, goes to Brantford for Lane Gallagher, terrific young hockey player. 2 seconds, a third, and a fifth. Heck, we just talked about Colin Fitzgerald. 6 picks for Fitzgerald going to the Sioux. So people just wondered. So that's part one of where I lead down this trail of conspiracy here. The second part of it is there has been a history in this league of the so-called two-part deal, the little wink and the handshake. And I think Dan and I alluded to this last week, where a team that is going for it this year makes a deal that really helps them go for it. And then after they've finished their year of going for it, there's a little return deal to the team that made the deal this year to help the one team so they can have the benefit the next year. For example, we could go back to 2008 when the Kitchener Rangers were going for it, hosting the Memorial Cup. They acquire Steve Mason from the London Knights. And the next year, in a less talked about move, Nazem Kadri quietly slides off to the London Knights. That year, the Knights add John Tavares and they go for it in 2009, right? 2017, Kitchener Rangers trade Jeremy Bracco to the Windsor Spitfires. Spitfires are hosting and they win the Memorial Cup. And the next year, the Rangers make a long run. They go for it. Logan Stanley comes from Windsor to Kitchener, really beefs up the Rangers back end. That's the sort of thing has happened before. So you've got the previous market for top NHL picks, first and second rounders. You've got the nudge, nudge, wink, wink, handshake deals that have happened before in the Ontario Hockey League with teams that are going for it 1 year and then helping the team go for it that made the trade the next year. You put those things together, and I started thinking, okay, so is it possible that the Lane Gallagher trade is just the first piece between Brantford and Guelph? And if it is part one of a multi-part deal, wouldn't it be interesting if the player coming the other way in the summer, handshake, wink, is the son of a former Guelph Storm who almost, this father, became the Storm's coach before Corey Stillman was hired. This father of the player in Brantford won an OHL championship with the Guelph Storm when current Guelph Storm GM George Burnett was the head coach. So I'm talking about Manny Malhotra. His son Caleb plays for Brantford. Wouldn't it, Dan, tell me that's not a fantastic story just waiting to be written? And Malhotra comes from Brantford to Guelph this offseason. I know he's got NCAA aspirations or commitments, but a chance to play for a Memorial Cup after you will likely play for a Memorial Cup this year sounds pretty tempting to me. Again, it makes for a great story from where I'm sitting. I think I've explained why you might ask the question. I think I've explained why Malhotra would be a beautiful story. And I ask you, Dan Mahar, what do you think of my conspiracy theory? I'll pass the tinfoil hat right across the screen to you.
Well, Mike, I'm not going to throw you under the bus and say you're a nutso conspiracy theorist because I actually have the receipts before we even talked about this of a couple people emailed me and said, what's up with that trade? And I replied to them and said, bet you it's a two-parter, and even referenced the name Caleb Malhotra.
Now, Dad, you're just the kind of conspiracy theorist I need as a partner.
Exactly. And now I'll add a little more to this just so we're not going totally crazy. So there's a few layers to this. So first of all, Caleb Malhotra just makes sense to you, makes sense to me for those reasons you just identified. He would be a huge chip. Guelph clearly needs to load up next year. You got to figure what would motivate Guelph to move Luchanko that quickly to the first bidder at a mediocre price. With all due respect to Lane Gallagher, he's a great player, like you said, but didn't quite jive with what you might have been able to milk from another market if you had a little bit of a bidding war over a week or two, right? So Guelph, knowing that there's a nice piece in Brantford that could be a huge piece for that Memorial Cup next year makes a ton of sense to me. Now, I continue to be told Caleb Malhotra is definitely committed to the NCAA next year. We'll see. He's not the only piece in Brantford that could come back. I still firmly believe it's a bit of a two-parter one way or the other. Now, when you talk about the price and you say, well, why is the price so low? And people say, well, why was the price so low for Brady Wassel? And you see some of these deals. The common answer, the only answer I really get is that, well, they called their shots. Wassel wanted to go to London. Luchanko wanted to go to Brantford. Fair. Possibly, but that's, to me, there's a little more to it, because if that were the case, you didn't need to act now if you're Guelph. You had some time to milk this, to tease it out, to see what other bidders were going to come into the market, to talk to the player, to convince him. There's other dynamics at play as well. So I think if that's the only reason that you could say, well, the price was lower, then you have to start to give some credence to the theory that there's a two-parter, right? Because for Guelph to be so eager to jump on it, and I know they had talked about a Luchanko deal last year with Brantford. I know it had fallen through, so some of the groundwork was laid. But like you said, Mike, it does not jive with the other prices, and therefore you have to open your mind to the possibility that there's something coming back. It just makes too much sense for Guelph to want more for Luchanko to bolster their run next year.
I love the point about calling one's shot. And hey, if you can do that, and when you're Jet Luchanko, you probably can, why not call that shot to the team that is setting the standard, or basically saying to every other team in the OHL this year, come and get us if you dare, because this Brantford team is already a wagon. So I already gave you the shameless plug about Fridays with Farwell. If you subscribe to the YouTube channel, you'll know every Friday when a new video gets posted. So this comes out Friday morning. I'm around the rink all weekend, Dan. And let's just say this conspiracy theory I floated created a little bit of conversation. And what if I told you, Dan Mahar, that I have it from some very well-placed sources that I am 100%, absolutely, positively, completely off my rocker, and there is no second part to this deal. From Dan, I'm telling you, from very well-placed sources, they say, Farwell, great theory, you're an idiot. Not happening.
And you know that might be true, but consider this: they have to say that because two-part trades are illegal.
Wow, you're calling out the well-placed source, Dan. They're well-placed.
I'm just saying. So what I'm going on is this: they know they can get in a lot of trouble for acknowledging there's anything remotely suggesting there's a two-part trade. So they have to say this. They have to tell you're an idiot. And when you talk about the trades that you referenced in the past, I remember the exact same thing. The Nazem Kadri piece of that Steve Mason deal was one of the worst kept secrets around. Every single time anyone asked Peter DeBoer or anyone else around the range, oh, you're an idiot. There's no way. Like stop with this nonsense. Well, guess what happened in the summer? So I just say take that with a pinch of salt.
Okay, fair enough. One of these well-placed sources even asked if they could borrow my tinfoil hat. So listen, I'll just leave it at that. But I was mocked pretty mercilessly on the weekend around the rink. Let me throw one more wrinkle at you, Dan, because this was so delicious for me. And by the way, by the time I saw this, I had already been informed what an idiot I was. There is no second part to this deal, okay? And I want to insist again, Lane Gallagher, I love you. I can't wait to watch you more often in Guelph. I mean that. I love this league. I love the talent in it. I can't wait to watch this kid blossom. Got nothing to do with your abilities as a player. We've already explained why we think there might have been a second part. But gosh darn it, don't I go to Brantford last Saturday night, and who is there watching the game but George Burnett, the general manager of the Guelph Storm? Why? Dan, I ask you, again, I'm an idiot. I accept that. I told a nice story. I still think it's a nice story if Caleb Malhotra went to play for a championship where his dad won a championship. Put that aside. George, what is George Burnett doing in Brantford like a week after he makes the Luchanko trade?
Well, and this is where you get plausible deniability if you're the well-placed sources, right? Like you say, well, there's no second part. You're nuts, Mike. You're an idiot. Okay, maybe the deal hasn't been consummated yet. Maybe there's a list of players that are potentially going back to Guelph in the offseason. Maybe it's not necessarily Malhotra. There's all kinds of reasons you can kind of say, yeah, we're just here to watch the game. I don't know, maybe get a look at some of these players who we might be interested in this summer. All I'm saying is that if and when a player goes from Brantford to Guelph in the summer, a few people owe you an apology, Mike. That's all I'm saying.
It was all I could do, Dan. It was all I could do to not go over and just say hi to George. We've had a great relationship over many years. I'm like, hey, George, what's going on? What are you doing here? Like, I mean, we know you're looking to build your roster for next year, but aren't you done with these guys, or what's the deal? Oh, it was fun. Okay, one more quick thing on Brantford. Going there on the weekend, Dan, I got to tell you, the folks of the Telephone City are huge supporters of this podcast, and it's fantastic. Like, they absolutely, well, I mean, I shouldn't speak for everybody that generally, but honestly, so much feedback, positive feedback about the podcast. I ran into one fella, and I really wish I had been aware enough to ask his name, because he was so kind, showing me a little shortcut through the arena, and said, I was going to bring you a coffee tonight. There's a real good coffee shop nearby. I just didn't have time to stop on my way to work, but I wanted to bring you a coffee because I guess in the past, shocker, I complained about the quality of coffee in the, well, there isn't a media room in Brantford, but they have a coffee machine, a coffee maker in the press box that we could drop a little pod into and have a cup of coffee. Wasn't the best. But listen, and he said, I just wanted to bring you that cup of coffee because I want you to say nice things about the city. Brantford, it's not about the city. I have a soft spot for the city. It was where I got my very first professional radio job. I used to work part-time doing the overnight show at the old CKPC in Brantford. And by the way, I was telling the story on this podcast a little over a month ago. I was in Brantford at the Boys and Girls Club helping out with a fundraiser. I was the MC for the night. And when they found out I was from Kitchener, and by extension, I'm a Rangers broadcaster and fan, I was booed mercilessly. I was at your charity event on a Saturday night giving my time to the Boys and Girls Club, you knuckleheads. But no, it was all in good fun. And I really they've got passion for the Bulldogs. But it's not about, I've got nothing against the city. The arena, look, they're doing the best that they can. It's the smallest barn in the league. They're building the new one. I am really picking on nits if I whine about the lack of a media room. They give you a coupon to grab a bite to eat. It's fine. Sure, the coffee wasn't the best, but let me let you in on this little secret. Up until now, I would have said that, and I have for a while, North Bay has the worst coffee in the league. The worst coffee in the league. Well, guess what? Kitchener Rangers have a new media room now. And somewhere in the last few weeks, they've changed the coffee machine. And I don't know if they just didn't, like, it's a bigger urn now for the coffee. I don't know if they didn't change the ratio of water to coffee grounds or what, or if it's just a different brand of coffee. But let me tell you, currently, the worst coffee in the league is in Kitchener. I take my own coffee to Kitchener games now. It is so bad. And yes, this is the kind of elitist jackwagon I am. They've done a great job in Brantford with the player facilities. They've invested where it matters the most. The players have great amenities. It's great on their side of the barn. The press box is way too cramped. They got way too many off-ice officials in there that I wish they would put somewhere else, because it's very difficult to do our jobs there. And yes, the coffee, it ain't great. But Brantford as a city, we love you. We really do. Love the market. That barn, Dan. Have you been to a game yet at the Civic Center?
I have not been to a Bulldogs game. I have coached in that barn.
Okay.
So I'm familiar with the barn.
Yeah. And they get the announcer turned up to 13, not just 11, but 13. They lather that fan base up, and they're fantastic. It's a great atmosphere for a junior game. That said, I am looking forward to the new barn being built.
Yeah. I have nothing but good things to say about that community and how they've supported it and they're behind it. And I think I told you a story last year in the summer with the family in Ottawa, and ran into a family with some Bulldog shirts and had a lovely chat with them. Behind that team, all in, and they're deserving everything they're getting this year, because that team is a joy to watch.
And how about our buddy Matt, who follows the podcast, told us that great story about Joey Costanzo a couple of seasons ago, interacting with a young fan. Great all around. So I'll just leave it there. Want you to know that as a city, it's got nothing against the city. Love the city of Brantford. I'm sorry I complained about the coffee. I'm only ever going to be honest with you. If I think the coffee's bad, the coffee's bad. If I think the press box is cramped, the press box is cramped. This is just me telling you like it is behind the scenes. And I can see behind our scenes here, Dan, the gentleman who helps on the video production side of this podcast is rolling his eyes and wishing that he could take the past 5 minutes of this podcast. He wants nothing to do with listening to me go on and on about the quality of the coffee and the tight quarters in the press box, but tough noogies to him too.
He's a heck of a producer, and he can cut that right out. So
no, don't give him any ideas. No, I want this to stay in. I want Brantford to know that I love you as a city, but the coffee at the Civic Center sucks. That's all, okay? It's nothing against the city. We got more content, like the important stuff, okay, still coming on this episode of the OHL podcast. It might be the best, certainly one of the best emails we've ever received from, by the way, a city where I think I would love to see the OHL go to Thunder Bay. Wouldn't you? We'll find a way to get it up there. We talked about that before. Sure. Anyway, the email comes from Thunder Bay. Great, though, question being asked about the OHL's Central Division. Plus, a video review fail in Peterborough and a look at every team in the league with our wraparound coming up next on this week's episode of the OHL podcast. Spinorama's Michigan goals, a sprawling save across the crease. Live and breathe all the highlight moments with DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NHL. New customers, bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $200 in bonus bets instantly. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app and use code THPN. That's code THPN to turn $5 into $200 in bonus bets if your bet wins. In partnership with DraftKings, the crown is yours. Every week on this podcast, we make sure to take a look at every market in the league, a little something that we call the wraparound because, that's a hockey term and stuff. And Dan, we got a comment on the YouTube page this past week, which we love. We told you we love interacting. Emails, ohlpodcast@rogers.com. Tag us on X, interact with us there. Dan's at his name, Dan Mahar. I'm at Farwell_OHL. But the comment was, why do you always do Sudbury last? And I had to chuckle. We haven't really made it clear, I suppose. We do this alphabetically, so it's nothing against Sudbury or Windsor. Sudbury is the last team alphabetically in the East. Windsor, the last team alphabetically at all in the league. But every once in a while, just to make sure that, we're not favoring markets or appearing to, we do it in reverse. So based on that comment on our YouTube channel, Dan, how do you feel about reversing the old alphabet and starting from Windsor down this week?
Sure, we can do that. I'll have to remember my reverse alphabet. But yeah, we'll start with the W. That's safe.
Got it. I like it.
So yeah, Windsor, I've heard a lot of consternation lately coming out of Windsor and just, fans saying, I don't know, this team isn't quite as good as we thought. Things are going in. And then I look and see, you've still got the second best win percentage in the OHL. So things are not terrible. Though I did notice Captain Liam Greentree, just a goal and assist in the last 5 outings, which are very un-Greentree-like stats. And I have to wonder, this is that time of year when you start to wonder if the weight of World Junior selection starts to play on some players. So we'll see how that transpires in the next couple weeks, but not the greatest run up to that selection process for Mr. Greentree.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. And if I may, perhaps liken it to Owen Sound just a little bit. I mean, look, when you start the season like a house on fire, you can't sustain it for 68 games. So maybe this is just a little bit of, regressing to the mean or something.
Yeah, ebbs and flows through the season for sure, but we've seen it before with the Team Canada prospects. They're a week or two before sometimes aren't the best, so we'll see.
Great point. Okay, so for the East, starting at the last letter in the alphabetical order, it is Sudbury. So there you go, YouTube commenter. The Wolves get first love on the eastern side of the wraparound, and this team has started, count them, 5 different goalies so far this season, including Bjorn Bronas most recently, who won 2 of his first 3. But goals against have been a problem for the Wolves, who have allowed the most in the Eastern Conference and the second most in the league at 111. But here's what I'm looking at in between those numbers. I wonder if the Wolves are starting to figure something out. They did have an off night in a pretty bad 8-2 loss to Brampton last week, but in a stretch during which Sudbury won 4 of 6. So let that sink in. That's a pretty good run for a team that's been struggling. And they allowed just 8 goals over those 4 wins. So obviously the recipe for them is to limit chances, keep those goals against down. And the Wolves might be seeing even a 6th starter at some point this season after they acquired the rights to Paulo Frasca from Windsor. He's put up great numbers with St. Andrews College and currently the Victoria Grizzlies in the BCHL.
They've definitely been working on that defense in practice.
They have.
All right, moving up to the Sioux, and I just wanted to note some of the additions to that lineups, we talked about Colin Fitzgerald, got on the scoreboard in his first game with an assist and a 6-2 win. And don't forget Callum Croskery on the back end, a heck of a talent that has missed most of the year with an unfortunate injury he sustained early on. And he put up a +2 in his first game. So 2 big young boosts to that Sioux lineup.
It's always nice when you kind of get those additions that were already on your roster. They just come back from that injury. And it's like, what a great way to add without having to give anything up, right?
Found money. Yeah.
Absolutely. For Peterborough, next for me on the eastern side, and I'm looking at first overall pick, Caden McGregor. 2 goals in 10 games, but that was before leaving for the U17s in Halifax. After coming back with a silver medal, McGregor picked up 2 goals in his next 4 and had a nice little heater where he put up points in 5 of 6 games with 2 goals and 4 assists in that stretch. Now, I don't know about you, Dan, but I'm a little bit torn on these tourneys because not only are you sort of robbing Peter to pay Paul, you're losing a player like McGregor, and other teams obviously lose players to go off and play at these tournaments, and then you're adding more games to an already busy calendar year for hockey players, etc. But we've seen this before where you get a chance to go and you play among your peers and you come back to your OHL club and it's lights out, and that's kind of been the case for Caden McGregor.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly why teams don't have a problem with it falling in season, because we've seen that U17 bump so many times. All the turmoil at the start of the year, these players they're finding their footing, go away, play in that tournament, remember how good they are, and then come back and just take off from there. It's a great tournament. Yeah.
Great point.
All right, sliding down to Sarnia, next on my reverse alphabetical list. And, we talked about Matt Turcotte, and I thought his post-game comments after the 6-2 loss to the Sioux really resonated. He talked about that was a team that's lacking confidence, and it was bang on. He clearly had them prepared. They jumped out to a 2-0 lead. They looked great in the first period. Thought, oh, wow, the Turcotte era has ushered in 6 straight from the Sioux, losing 6-2. And they just, like he said in the postgame, that's a team that's fragile, without confidence. One thing goes wrong, and everything goes south. But you look at players who are struggling right now. Like I look at Mitch Young. Team needs a lot more from him. He's struggling right now. But that's a player who, with the new coaching, as they gain confidence back, look out, because there is talent there. They're not playing to their level right now, and it's going to take a few weeks.
Yeah, I love your analysis of that, and it'll take a while. It would have been a nice story if you win your first, but those wins are coming for Matthew Turcotte and the Sarnia Sting for sure. To the nation's capital for me in Ottawa, and let me tell you this, when the game is on the line, you want Cooper Foster on the ice. Foster's 5 game-winning goals have him tied for the league lead, and he reeled off 3 consecutive GWGs as the 67s beat Niagara, Kingston, and Kitchener a little over a week ago. So Cooper Foster tied for the league lead with 5 game winners.
Team just keeps rolling.
Yeah, I know. Every time I look, I'm like, speaking, we talked about teams starting earlier with like a house on fire. It's not sustainable. Some way, somehow, it has been for the Ottawa 67s, hasn't it?
Somehow, and like we said, they're running into a home stretch now, so look out.
Look out.
Yeah, so going to Saginaw, I just wanted to take this opportunity to point out a good individual performance. These things pop up throughout the season, and you have Saginaw, who's had some ups and downs this year. Tough home and home with London, but on the first end of that, in London, Carson Harmer, 2 goals and assist, game's first star in that 4-2 win. I just like these little performances where it's just a player saying, you know what, tonight I'm going to be good, and going out and doing it. And Saginaw seems to have enough of those over the years, do they not?
Yeah, that's a great point. They've got some real studs over there, and it's a reminder, Dan, that even when it's not the best season for your team, there's always likely a reason to go to the rink and see a performance from somebody.
Yeah, and especially that team, they always have someone that comes out of the woodwork and just puts up offense, which is what the casual fans love to see, right? So.
That ties in nicely to Oshawa for me, because I never want to pile on when things aren't going well for a team. We all know what the standings are, and look, when you make back-to-back runs to the OHL final, things are going to be a little rough. And that's the case for the Gens right now. Fewest goals scored in the league by far. They're averaging just over 2 per game. And wins have also been hard to come by. Thanks to Sudbury's little run recently, the Gens now sitting dead last in the 20-team loop. Any success Oshawa is having is coming from keeping games close. They are 3-2 in 1-goal games this season. But when the goal differential is greater, the wins are fewer. Oshawa has won just 2 of 13 games that are decided by 2 or 3 goals. And the Gens are one of only 2 teams in the league so far this season without a win when trailing after the first. Sudbury is the other. So we knew it would be a rough year in Oshawa, but when they keep it close, they got their best chance of winning, says Captain Obvious.
Is the price you pay for being really, really good. But
yes, sir.
All right, moving up to Owen Sound, and I'm going to touch on just 2 quick points that we've touched on before, but they're still, I love these stories, right? These guys that just flip a switch and turn it on. And how about Harry Nancy? We talked about, in an entire season last year, 67 games, just 23 points. Decent season, finding his feet. This year, through just 27 games, 34 points, and looking like a premier, top flight forward with his size, with his speed. Just a great breakout year. I love seeing those stories. But Owen Sound, again, a reminder to you, if you're going to have the most penalty minutes in the league, you want to have better than the 3rd worst penalty kill. So one of the two has to give. That's all. Just a tip.
I love that. And keep it in mind. Put a little pin in that one, because I have a similar message to another team in this league. So that'll come on the eastern side of the wraparound as I go reverse alphabetical now down to North Bay. And you got to love a guy who loves a change of scenery. Caden Petrie, picked up by North Bay from Flint. He had just 7 points in 12 games with the Firebirds, but with the Battalion, Petrie had 4 points, 2 goals and 2 assists in just his first 2 games. North Bay sent Iggy Pazzi the other way, and moving that import also made room in North Bay for Alexander Karmanov, the 7'1" defenseman from Moldova, who was just released by Brantford. Karmanov had 3 goals and 4 assists so far this season with the Brantford Titans of the GOHL. So the largest hockey player on the planet is now in North Bay.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I'm not sure moving Patsy really makes room for Karmanov. But anyway. So moving to London. So we always talk about these players that come into London and start making an impact out of nowhere. And I think, early returns on overage center Braden Clark were mixed, running at about 0.5 points per game through the season, just kind of doing his thing. But bit of a breakout against Saginaw in the second of that home and home with a 3-point night. So look for a big second half from a kid that is now acclimatized to that night system.
I think we touched on this last week as I look at Niagara now, but what does the second half look like for Frank Evola as general manager? Is it going to be a January 10th trade deadline where the Ice Dogs take on a completely different look for the rest of the season? The struggle is real for the Ice Dogs, and that's just repeating. It's a rinse and repeat there, isn't it? It all changed in November, where they just had a brutal stretch, falling from 1st in the division to 4th. Assistant coach Luke Israel leaves the team. Starting goaltender Charlie Robertson out with a lower body injury. But here is a bright spot. The Ice Dogs' road power play was clicking at just 4%. Just 4%. But they came into Kitchener last weekend and they scored 2 power play goals. Niagara, also one of 2 teams who have scored 2 shorthanded goals in a game this season. The other is Windsor. So I'm trying to find some bright spots for you. We had Niagara pegged to be so much higher in the standings, Dan. They were, and things, the wheels, I guess, have just come off the wagon.
They have, and we saw them recently, you and I both, Mike, and yeah, I was pretty disappointed with how kind of disorganized and unfocused they were, because that team, you and I both had it, should have been better.
You betcha.
All right, and if you want to talk about the unfair side of hockey, how about this, Mike? Moving to Kitchener. So, not to throw Christian Kirch under the bus, none of these 3 goals were his fault, but 3 goals on 3 shots in the first 2 minutes of that game against Brantford. So 0 for 3. Jason Schaubel comes in the rest of the way, plays a terrific game, stops 17 of 18, and gets the loss because the Kitchener Rangers storm back to tie it at 3. Brantford gets a goal late in the third to win 4-3. Poor Jason Schaubel gets the L after brilliantly recovering for a very putrid start, we'll call it, for the team. But it's not always fair in the stats column.
Yeah, that was one of those things where you had to do something to shake the team up because Kitchener was completely overwhelmed in that first 6 minutes. But I think you're right about Kirsch. You can't hold him. Like the Bulldogs just came at the Rangers and had their way in the beginning. But the goaltending change settled the team down. And I thought what we ended up with on Saturday, Dan, in Brantford, was one of the best junior hockey games I've seen all season. That was 2 very good hockey clubs going at it.
Yeah, well, first you're absolutely right. Three goals on 3 shots looks terrible on a goalie stat sheet, but Kirsch had no chance on any of them. They were tic-tac-toe plays. Kitchener was standing around, looked awful. I thought, oh, we're in for a long night. Is this going to be like a 10-0 drubbing? But to their credit, after the goaltending change and a timeout, the Rangers actually were full value the rest of that game, and if anything, they have deserved to win it. So you're right. They salvaged what looked like a horrible game and turned it into a very entertaining one.
I'm looking at Kingston next on the eastern side of our wraparound, and the Fronts scored a season-high 9 goals back on October the 10th. They scored 7 in another win. They've had 5 a couple of times, but that was then. Right now, there's a drought in the Limestone City where a 5-game losing streak saw the Fronts score 2, 2, 2, 1, and 1. Yikes. A power play operating at 14.5% also is not helping. The offense has abandoned the Frontenacs.
And I know a lot of Kingstonites are Habs fans like me, and they're probably getting flashbacks of the Carey Price era where you have Matthew Minchak in there doing everything he can, just not getting run support. But
yeah, great point.
So, moving to Guelph, Mike, and I know the Luchanko shoe dropped, so I just wonder how long it is before the Paquette and Miedema shoes drop. There's a few teams in search of overage forwards and veteran leadership, so we'll see what's next there. I'm sure it won't be long before we hear those names drop. And then you look at the Memorial Cup year two, and you wonder who the overagers are going to be for Guelph. Few options. Leo Serlin making his case with 2 goals and an assist on the weekend, so starting to shape up for next year, but we'll see how many shoes drop in the next few weeks there.
All right, for me, it's Brantford now on the wraparound, and we all know, I think, because the whole league was watching 23 straight games without a regulation loss. That finally happened. I'll get to the Giant Killers in a bit, but as we look at the Bulldogs, 2-time Eastern Conference champion Zachary Sandu appeared in career game number 200 on the weekend. Sandu still looking for his first goal of this season, and along with teammate Ben Danford, is looking for a third straight trip to the OHL final. Those two obviously coming over in the deal with Oshawa. Bulldogs played a game versus Kitchener on Saturday that Dan and I just alluded to. Very entertaining junior hockey game, and not a single power play in the game. There was a fight early on, and then there were coincidental minors. I believe it was in the second period, and that was it. They played 5-a-side, 0 power plays in the game. Darcy Burchell, Kevin MacArthur, couple of vets as referees. You know what? I'll shout them out that way because I think they managed a good hockey game very well.
Yeah, and often, Mike, when I see that no power plays, I'm like, oh, come on. You just weren't calling anything. There was a few infractions. But actually watching that game, I thought they managed it pretty well. I didn't see a whole lot. Both teams were disciplined. Well-called game.
Yep.
How about a well-oiled machine in Flint? I mean, we talked about it, 11 straight for that team, and they're not easy wins. They're running through some good teams, some fired-up teams, some teams that threw a lot at them, and they're just doing it game after game. And how about the fact that Matthew Wang might be back soonish, starting to look like he's nearing a return? And with uncertainty around Chris Thibodeau's status, maybe even have an OA spot to add, I think sneaky buyer this year with their roster. Flint could, and if you'd asked me about my bingo card at the start of the year, I definitely would not have had Mason Vicari at 15-3-1 at this stage. Good on him, and he is full value. We've seen him a couple times, Mike. He is full value. That team is full value. So great things happening in Flint, and I love it.
This adds to the anxiety in Windsor, right? Because the Firebirds, I mean, look, when you reel off double-digit wins in a row, of course you're charging up the standings, but all of a sudden the Firebirds are threatening the Spits for top spot in the West Division and the Western Conference.
Yeah, and not to bring it back to Kitchener-centric all the time, but I see players like Nathan Aspinall and Alex Kostov, and they remind me of Trent Swick and Kitchener, right? Who, finding his footing in the league for a few years, similar frames, and then just once they figure out how to finish, look out, and you're starting to see it.
All right, I mentioned it when I was talking about Brantford. Now it's to Brampton, and here are your Giant Killers this year. The Steelheads stopping Brantford's run of games without a regulation loss at 23, and they did it in fine fashion. Gabriel Sherratt scored with 14 seconds remaining to help Brampton beat Brantford 2-1. And you got to give Zach Bowen some love, too, as he made 34 saves in that win. Now, the Steelheads are in the midst of 7 of 8 at home, and they've picked up points in 5 straight games. Like Dan said last week on this podcast, go see these guys at the CAA Center. The arena might not wow you, but this team is playing pretty well.
They are. A lot of talent there. Like Sherratt, underrated player. But anyway, I'm going to finish up Mike in Erie. And, fans often struggle with the concept of depth and what that means. And you look at a team like Erie has struggled to score, not a lot of offensive potency. And we would all agree Erie, a bottom end team in the league this year. And then you look at the standings, you look at our hometown team, a team like Kitchener near the top. Well, you look at the top three scorers on Erie, Mike, 82 points amongst them. Top three in Kitchener, just 73. So you think, wow. But then the drop off is precipitous from there, down to 12 points for the next highest scorer on the Erie Otters. So that's where depth starts to hurt your lineup, and you start to become a little bit of a one-line or two-player team. So until they find a little bit of depth scoring down the stretch, it's going to be a tough go. But the top end is doing their job. That's Deck, Frasca, and Edwards are piling up the points.
Yeah, interesting analysis there on depth for a roster. Okay, it's a little OHL podcast pop quiz. Remember when Dan was talking about Owen Sound? I said put a pin in it. Well, we're going to get to that pin now, the asterisk here with the Barrie Colts. And quite frankly, if it wasn't for Brantford, we might be talking more about Barrie because they've got points in 13 of 14 games and they have rocketed to the top of the Central Division. They're also getting it done despite having a lower end penalty kill. They're 15th in the league. And here's the thing. The Colts have the second most penalty minutes in the league. They average about 15 PIMs per game behind only Owen Sound. But the penalty kill, as I mentioned, sitting 15th overall, just over 75%. So just imagine how much scarier Barrie could be if that equation was cleaned up a little bit. They're taking second most penalty minutes, and the penalty kill is not great. But they're buzzing. Points in 13 of 14.
Yeah, it's scary when you see teams that are buzzing and have an obvious thing to fix, right? Because look out when they do.
Absolutely. Okay, that Central Division that we just alluded to will factor into one of the best pieces of email feedback we've ever received on this podcast, plus your prospects of the week and a video review fail in Peterborough still to come. So stay with us on this week's episode of the OHL Podcast. The holidays are here, and that means it's the most wonderful time of the year to save with Rakuten. Use Rakuten to stack cash back at your favorite stores on top of holiday sales. That's savings on savings. With Rakuten, you can get cash back on gifts for everyone on your list, from toys for the kids to kitchen gear for the person who loves to cook to electronics for everyone. You can even save on something for yourself. Just shop the stores you love, and cashback is automatically added to your account. You can choose to get paid via Interac e-transfer, PayPal, or check. And when I say stores you love, I'm talking about Sporting Life, Expedia, Adidas, Best Buy, PetSmart on there as well. Join for free today and get a new member bonus after minimum qualifying purchases. Just go to Rakuten.ca, download the app, or install the browser extension. That's RAKUTEN. Terms and conditions apply. Dan, we had the most unfortunate of unfortunate video review fails earlier this year in a game between the Saginaw Spirit and the Flint Firebirds when the league had to say after the game, "We are sorry. Please accept our mea culpa." Saginaw actually should have won the game in overtime. There was a clock synchronization issue. Flint goes on to win in a shootout. Literally a point lost for one team. There's no way to retroactively go back and add it, so we all just keep watching the standings. Right now, it doesn't look like it's going to be an issue at all, but oh boy, if that point comes into play later on in the season. Well, we had another pretty bad video review fail in Peterborough, a game between the Battalion and the Petes this past week. What do you make of it?
Yeah, I was watching the game live, and it's weird because, so with the Battalion up 1-0 fairly late in the second period, the Petes scored a goal automatically challenged by the North Bay bench, and for good reason, because the second they started showing replays, I'm sitting there going, yeah, this is coming back. This is clear. It's an obvious one. Unfortunately, after a long delay, it looked to me, Mike, like it almost looked like they maybe reviewed the wrong thing, because when they came back to the bench after the call, there was a second follow-up conversation with Ryan Houlihan in the bench where it looked like they were motioning to the far side of the blue line, so that maybe they had looked at the wrong player, and Houlihan said, well, wait a minute, we're talking about on this side, and they kind of went back, had another conversation, the four officials, and said, yep, goal's good. Whereas I'm looking at the replay saying, well, I'm not sure what we're looking at. We're supposed to have better video. We're supposed to have better angles and quicker reviews. And everything about this pointed to an obvious offside. So not only did they call the goal good, now 1-1 late in the second, Peterborough gets a power play, could have changed the whole face of the game. Thankfully, North Bay came back and won that game in the third, so it ends up being somewhat moot. But the point stands. I'm sure Ryan Ullahan was as confused as I was and the rest of the people watching is, how can that stand? Like, you can't have the double punishment of the penalty after as well. We just got to get these right. And if it's inconclusive and you can't tell, that's one thing. But it sure looked conclusive to me, Mike. So I'm a little concerned at how that one went down.
I'm going to take a glass half full look at this because your point is very well taken. And when we at home watching can see something that for some reason got missed in the rink, and it's so obvious, like we made the right call from our couch, then absolutely the frustration begins to mount. Here's my glass half full look at this. And some of it's a little bit cheeky, but North Bay does win the game. They killed off the power play, so their penalty kill stats go up. So there you go. Take that one to the bank, Ryan Ullahan. And this is not happening every night. Now, we already did acknowledge the time where it was so bad it impacted the outcome of the game. And that's the worst case scenario. But this isn't happening every night. This didn't impact the outcome of the game. I know from times in the past where I've struggled to understand why something was called the way it was when I had a different angle or perspective on it. And unfortunately, we just don't know what happened on the ice. I've been in buildings before where the tablet wasn't powered up and you couldn't even, like, the battery had failed and you didn't have a power supply for it. Other times where the Wi-Fi connection was bad, so the videos that were being sent down were choppy or non-existent. Not every camera in the building was working, etc. I'm not making excuses at all, but these are some of the things that can be happening. So it looks so obvious to us, but perhaps the officials didn't have that angle in the ring. I know that we want the calls to be right every single time, and the idea of having these 7 different camera angles in every rink now with this new equipment is meant to eliminate the errors, but there are still some humans involved in this, and they are going to make mistakes. So unless it impacts the outcome of the game like it did one time this season, if it's not happening every night, I'm going to just say we have to try to take a breath. It just gives people something to complain about. And I get that, and it's fine. But let's remember, none of us is perfect. We make mistakes every single day. The key is, when the mistake is made, are they making the necessary adjustments to remedy it? We learned that from the Flint-Saginaw issue. They talked about fixing this clock synchronization issue. I'm sure whatever went wrong with this review in Peterborough, they've remedied it, and we're going to get better after this little mistake that fortunately didn't impact the outcome of the game.
Yeah, no, that's well said. And you know, you're right. We don't know. It's just curious that the North Bay bench clearly had the replays that we were seeing at home. So they were available in the building somehow, maybe just not to the... And it was my speculation of what went down, because the offside itself happened right in front, at top of frame, right in front of the North Bay bench. And when Ryan Ullahan asked for an explanation, it looked like the official was pointing to the far side of the blue line. So the conversation continued. So it looked like maybe they had just looked at the wrong thing, and Ullahan's, no, we're talking about here. And then they had the opportunity to maybe go back and look again, which they didn't. They conversed and said, no, good goal. So it looked like maybe something was lost in translation there, and that's all. And it's unfortunate. Thankfully, it didn't cost North Bay the game. You just like to see them do a little better, because this one appeared to be one of the more clear ones I've seen.
I've mentioned this a couple of times in this episode already, the email we received from Eric to ohlpodcast@rogers.com. And it's so well written, I'm just going to read it verbatim. And then, Dan, get your perspective on this. Hi, Mike and Dan. My name is Eric. I'm a regular listener of your OHL podcast and a longtime North Bay Battalion supporter, now living in Thunder Bay. Hey, Eric, that's further north. You know that, right? But no, I love Thunder Bay. I used to work up there, would love to see the league up there, but geography is a challenge. Anyway, I have a topic I want to run by you guys that in the grand scheme of things is frivolous, but nonetheless might be worth discussing. And clearly, Dan and I agree. Championships, Eric writes, have been few and far between for teams that compete in the OHL's Central Division. In the 26 years since the adoption of the 4-division format, one team from this division has hoisted the J. Ross Robertson Cup, the Barrie Colts in 1999-2000. Some have come close, and there's also been a lot of movement and realignment within the division. I recognize that A, it's a developmental league, and B, it ultimately comes down to who can get it done in the playoffs. But how do you explain why teams from the Central have, historically speaking, had trouble winning at all? Are there other factors at play here? Are teams in the Central Division jinxed, or am I just reading too much into the tea leaves? Championships by division since 1998-99. 7 for the East, 1 for the Central, 14 for the Midwest, and 3 for the West. As always, great show. Keep up the good work. Thank you, Eric. Fantastic email. Love the breakdown. I hadn't even thought of it, but it is interesting, Dan. Do you think there's any answer as to why the Central Division struggles to win championships?
Well, yeah, thanks for the email, Eric. It's a great email, and it was so well written. I feel like I'm letting you down with not the best answer, but I racked my brain around why this could be the case. And, there's 101 different possible explanations. And I thought, well, obviously travel's not a big concern there. And they've had some good coaching in and out, but I'm looking for common features. And I don't know, like all I can say is some of the Central Division buildings aren't the biggest, those franchises aren't the biggest revenue generators. Some older facilities, maybe they're more trouble luring some players when you do the drafts. I know for a fact, without getting into some names, I know for a fact that North Bay and Sudbury in some cases have had players put them on the don't draft me list. I'm not reporting. They've had some of those issues over the years. We know with Brampton, I'm sure that's happened just based on lack of fan support and atmosphere there. So there's some challenges there around the economics and being able to get the same access because the facilities aren't there. Maybe the scouting investment isn't there. Some of the other things and amenities that you could get in some of the other markets. But I mean, I'm stretching. There's not a real clear indication to me or a clear reason why the Central Division has struggled to get it done in the playoffs. But I think there are some factors at play.
I think you document what those factors might be very well there, Dan. And really what we have here, I think, is a bit of an anomaly or an outlier, with perhaps the exception. I mean, the point about the GTA teams, whether it was in Mississauga or Brampton, is well taken. Not a ton of atmosphere there. And this is a market, let's face it, is going to have to step things up in this new landscape of junior hockey, right? Where the NCAA options exist. I'll just point to Jack Ivankovic and Porter Martone recently flying the coop, so to speak, in Brampton and heading to greener pastures, perhaps in the NCAA with better facilities, better coaching, you name it, whatever the case may be, or strength training, all that other stuff that we've talked about. So you've got that aspect now for sure. But historically, it really is tough to explain. And let's not also forget, when it comes to the Midwest Division, I mean, you can thank London for most of those championships, but 14 out of the Midwest, where you've got some powerhouses, have had historically and continue to have powerhouses. So that skews the numbers a little bit. But maybe there's also that argument then about the rising tide raising all ships, right? We've talked about the Midwest Division a lot, and Dan and I are biased because it's the division we see so much of, but it's long been said that the Knights and the Rangers are like the Yankees and the Red Sox and things like that. But I struggle as well to put my finger on a possible single explanation to all of this. We know that it's been a struggle with ownership in Sudbury, and right now I think they might be a little focused, if not too focused, on getting the new building put together and looking at things from an operational standpoint instead of the on ice product right now. I think North Bay's been a great program. They just, for some reason, haven't been able to get over the top, right? They had some terrific runs in the mid teens, if you will. And then again, just very recently in North Bay. So hard to figure there. And well, Niagara's in a bit of a mess right now, again, unfortunately. So I'm grasping here too. I really don't think, though, we can give a definitive answer to this other than to say it's a bit of a coincidence or an outlier. And I mean, great work by you to make us aware of something that I hadn't even given consideration to. It's been a drought in the Central Division in terms of championships.
Yeah, but Mike, what you just said about the the rising tide, that actually crossed my mind too. And then when I was trying to rack my brain, the top couple reasons that rose to the top, and that was the other one. So I'm glad you touched on it. Was that when you talk about organizational standards bringing up your competition, you talk about where the London Knights are, and the Kitchener Rangers and the others too. Like you see what Owen Sound and Guelph have done, and you see these teams in the Midwest. When you have an organizational standard set here in your division and year over year they're competitive, you have no choice but to look at your own organization, bring it up here. If you don't have that in your division, doing that consistently, it's 1 year, it's Barry's kind of up, 1 year Sudbury's kind of up, but no one's kind of saying, the bar's here now. That can be a factor because when you get to the playoffs and you start running into some of those other teams, you're like, wow, maybe we're not quite at the standard we thought we are. We're not renewing that lineup to be effective every year. So I think that's a factor as well. I think that one's fair.
Great points all around. And Eric, once again, thanks for the email. Give us something to think about for sure. And we'll keep our eyes on the Central Division. Barry's playing very well right now. Who knows? Could they possibly upset a team like Brantford in a 7-game series? We're getting way ahead of ourselves. But thanks to Eric, we do now have another reason to keep a closer eye on the Central Division and that elusive J. Ross Robertson trophy. Send us emails anytime. We love the interaction. ohlpodcast@rogers.com. Which brings us, Dan, to the point of the podcast that we always end on, and that is our weekly prospect of the week. We each pick a player that caught the most of our attention who is NHL draft eligible. Who you got this week, Dansky?
Well, Mike, you know how I love stay-at-home defenders that do their job well and play a modern game. And a guy, I've liked since seeing him in his U16 draft year. So Andrew Robinson on the Windsor Spitfires. And the reason I love this kid is plays that modern game, can skate, terrific skater, terrific angles, terrific routes to pucks. Won't wow you on the stat sheet offensively, and those guys often get forgotten. But we all know how important they are to the wins. So we tend to give our players of the week and those types of things to who wowed us on the score sheet. And I'm kind of doing that this week because Andrew Robertson with a goal and assist and first star honors and a big win over Owen Sound, a 3-2 win over Owen Sound on the weekend. So nice to see a stay-at-home soldier get rewarded on the score sheet, but just consistently doing his job. And I think he went underrated in the Ontario Hockey League draft. We're going 3rd round to Windsor, and I think there's going to be some NHL teams really impressed by the game he brings. He looks like a kid whose tools will translate to pro. So Andrew Robinson's my guy this week, Mike.
I know you've always loved your stay-at-home defenseman, Dan, which is interesting to me because in playing with you in the past, I know that your favorite thing to do was undress those stay-at-home defensemen with your game as well. But you appreciate the work that they do. If only we had an Andrew Robinson to play against you back in the day. For me, I'm looking over to the Eastern Conference, and there is an Adam that gets all kinds of love when we look ahead to the NHL draft. That would be Novotny in Peterborough. But there's another Adam there in Peterborough that's saying, hey, just hang on a second. Don't forget about me over here. And I'm talking about Adam Levac. How about 4 goals, 3 assists in 6 games? Nice little stretch there. Up to 21 points on the season, which is double his output from a season ago. So rounding into form as we move into the month of December is Adam Levac. And I think he might be catching some attention of scouts watching those Peterborough Pete's games. So Adam Levac is my prospect of this week.
Great call. And I love what under the radar, what Peterborough's doing this year, right? And a couple, you just mentioned 2 Adams, couple great, and Caden McGregor you mentioned earlier as well. Like just a couple really, a number of really good players to watch in Peterborough this year.
Under the radar, what they're doing in Peterborough. What is general manager Mike Oak going to do with those 6 draft picks he just acquired from Sault Ste. Marie, Dan Mahar?
Well, yeah, you look at, both conferences right now. I mean, the East is weird because you got the team or whatever you want to call it that is the Brantford Bulldogs, but everything else is right there. If you want to get, 3 rounds of revenue in the playoffs, you might want to make a push. In the West, it's wide open. So there's a whole lot of question marks. And I'd go as far as to say, I think there's a whole lot, probably 19 GMs that don't know 18, because Guelph's going to sell. But we don't know, there's probably 18 GMs that aren't quite sure what to do right now.
Did I mention George Burnett was in Brantford on the weekend? I mean, I don't know why, Dan. I don't know why. There's no part 2. I'm apparently the biggest conspiracy theorist out there, and I need to put my tinfoil hat away. But there's George Burnett, and I'm like, can I have my hat back? Because anyway. That man right there, that's Dan Mahar. Find him on X at his name, Dan Mahar. You'll find me there at Farwell_OHL. Keep the interaction coming. Drop a comment, whether you're listening, watching on YouTube. Hey, Instagram is there as well, the OHL Podcast, and our email address, ohlpodcast@rogers.com. We're out every Tuesday morning with a new episode, bringing you the best information and a little bit of wisecracking about the OHL on the OHL Podcast.